I think naturally, as most people do when they're involved in the performing arts scene locally, they get involved with Gaddock and a stage school, and so that was kind of my route in. But yeah, from there it kind of, I never really took it too seriously like many people do and go away to drama school and dance school and so forth. So I didn't really go down that route. I kind of went off to uni to study, it was a BA Econ, so economics, but business studies and politics.
Okay.
So not quite in the in the creative scene. But yeah, I was kind of just, I'm of the generation of, on the back of Brexit. So when that happened in 2016, I was applying to uni and I was already interested in politics. So I kind of, that's where my interest space was, I guess. So I went off to the University of Manchester and studied politics and business for 3 years and came back and sort of settled into the finance industry as one does. But yeah, so that's kind of my background.
The finance sector, though, seems very different to me from the creative industry.
Yeah.
Are you still working in the finance industry alongside your work in the creative sector?
I am, yeah. So work full-time at Guernsey Finance. So that's my long-term, that's my career.
The creative sector, then, is it more of a passion for you?
Yeah, I think like it's got to be a passion. I mean, you probably wouldn't do it if there was no passion there. Mm-hmm. But like most things, if you get good enough, or if you stick at it for long enough, then eventually, opportunities come about. I think it's an interesting time here because obviously there's a discussion being had, I guess, in the kind of local civil society a little bit about like film industry, and we've heard recently about requests for taxpayer money being used, and that's very controversial, and which, by the way, I'm not convinced it ever should. But that has kind of like created a little bit of interest in the public sphere, and then plus the rising local short film scene and now feature film scene with Alex Bates, Cameron Ashplant, my brother, and others, Lars Janssen, Charlotte Potter, and others. So there's kind of been that kind of wider civil society discussion being had in the background, whilst there's kind of a burgeoning local short and now feature film scene on the rise. So I think that has kind of created an interest at that level.
And why do you think it's happened now? Is it just because the technology is more accessible?
I don't know. It's a good question because it feels like the technology was. I mean, that people have owned cameras and high res and high quality sort of cameras for I don't know, I want to say like the better part of at least a decade, if not longer. And again, sort of, editing software has been sort of readily available for probably the better part of a decade. So I don't know. I'm wondering whether it's on the back of COVID, because it kind of felt like in the early 2020s, at the start of this decade, it kind of like kicked off, and now it's kind of got a bit of traction. So I don't know really, because the technology's kind of always, it's been there for like I say, a good 10 or 15 years, but it's really, I guess we've seen it come about now, which is I don't really know why. I wonder why.
Yeah, and you mentioned the short films and also feature-length films.
Yes, yeah.
First of all, actually, what counts as a short film? How short are short films in the industry?
Yeah, well, I guess there's no. I'm probably the wrong person to ask because it's my first short film. But I think I'm right in saying there's no like particular definition. Okay. I think if you go to various film festivals, some will tell you it's no longer than 25 minutes. Some will say it's no longer than 45 minutes. Okay. And when you go beyond 45, it's a feature. So I think realistically, anything that's above an hour and 15, around that territory and more,
is a feature.
A feature. But if you're hovering around half an hour or less, then it's a short.
And do you work in both? Feature films, short films? Is it any length of films? Or are you focusing more on short films?
Well, I think the short film genre is a good place to start for any sort of like emerging filmmaker, because I think it allows you to try and test things out, at least from my experience on this short, in the way that a feature doesn't perhaps allow you to do. Because when you commit to a feature, not only do you need the kind of budget, it's the economics resource needed to make it happen, but also you're then committing huge kind of sums of your time to that vestiture. Whereas if you've got a short film, you can kind of reasonably get it off the ground in anything under a year, I would say. I mean, this took us a year to make, but we could have probably, if we were more pressing with time, we could have probably done it in 6, 7, 8, 9 months. So I think short film is a good place to start if you're an early sort of coming over the out of the box filmmaker. But I think in terms of my personal experience, I've never made a feature. I've been in a feature, so I was in Underground, the local horror feature by Guernsey Filmworks and Ravassa Films, but I've never made one, so I couldn't tell you.
So with your short film that we'll come on to in more detail in a moment, so it's called Bet Your Bottom Dollar.
Yes, yeah.
And you've been working on that for a year.
Yes.
How much time did you spend on it over the course of a year? Because as you said, you work full time. Was this just kind of evenings and weekends?
Yeah, it was purely evenings and weekends. And maybe if I'd booked some holiday in Guernsey and I was here, maybe sort of work on it. But we kind of shot it on weekends and in evenings and around people's schedules.
And so you wrote the short film.
Yeah.
And then obviously directed it.
Correct, yeah.
So it really is your baby, isn't it?
Yes,
this is your kind of creative idea.
Yes.
And it's come all the way through to fruition, being premiered this weekend. So what can you tell us then about, obviously we want people to go and watch it, but what can you tell us about Bet Your Bottom Dollar?
Well, I think it's probably worth me just contextualising it in the sense of it's not my story. So it's about addiction, it's about gambling addiction, specifically online betting addiction, which I think is quite nuanced and I think genuinely very underexplored as a social issue. When we talk about addiction, one often assumes we're talking about maybe alcohol addiction or maybe drug addiction. I don't know, and it feels like those particular addictions there's less taboo. Yeah. And I'm not just talking about in Guernsey. I'm talking about the wider world here. I mean, the wider Western world, as it were. That struck me as a really underexplored issue because I wanted to make a short film, but I wanted to do something different and something that hadn't necessarily been done. And I came across an article just purely by chance. I don't even remember how I came across it, but the article in question was by the UK charity Be Gamble Aware. You might have heard of them. And they published research where they basically claimed that 1.4 million people in the UK are experiencing what they call gambling harms, quote unquote. So this figure stuck with me, and I think having discussed it with a close friend who I wouldn't say is a betting addict, but has certainly dabbled in online formats of that kind, it dawned on me how much of a social issue this is. Because if you look at the population of the UK, 1.4 million is a sizable minority of people. So, I mean, I don't know what the stats and the data is around Guernsey and what the figures look like over here, but no doubt it touches lives here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that's impacting people's lives on a day-to-day basis on the island. So again, it just struck me as something that was underexplored, and I wanted to sort of scrape below the surface or pull back the curtain or whatever you want to say into this issue, and I thought the short film format was the perfect medium to do that.
So the story, while it's not your story, obviously you wrote the script, so a fair amount of research, I'm guessing, then into the gambling sector and online gambling in particular. Yes,
yeah, a lot. And again, it's one of those where the more you go down that rabbit hole, the darker it gets. In the sense of, I think it was a really important balance between appreciating, because when I say 1.4 million people, it's kind of like it's a figure, it doesn't necessarily mean something, but that's 1.4 million people's lives. So as well as sort of appreciating the data and looking at the qualitative side, it was also important to understand the quantitative side. It was also important to understand the qualitative side, i.e. the human stories. So yeah, it was really important to kind of just do a lot of online desktop research and understand the human stories. I mean, if you look at kind of the common thread that I kind of came across, and without giving too many spoilers, kind of built into the narrative, was this idea that victims feel as though and they are ultimately victims because it is addiction. They feel that the industry is kind of created in such a way that it sucks one in and doesn't let them leave on their own volitions. In the sense that once you lose money, the way of getting out of that situation is perhaps to do some more gambling, and inevitably that leads to more and more debt. And if you're a vulnerable person, that's just that's a vicious cycle. So that struck me as shocking, because even if there's no doubt regulation in place around this, I'm not convinced it addresses the problem in question. And if people feel like it isn't, and those at the coalface feel like it really isn't, then something's going tragically wrong.
Bet Your Bottom Dollar isn't going to be a comedy or a light-hearted film.
No.
It's going to be upsetting, traumatic for some people to watch if they've got those issues.
Yeah, certainly.
Educational, perhaps, for other people who don't.
We were quite particular in that we didn't want to, and again, I don't want to spoil some things here, but it doesn't reveal in first principle the the actual addiction. It's kind of a post experience, if you like. So it's once it's happened, what does one come across when dealing with the result of it without being too ambiguous? So in a sense, hopefully it won't be too distressing or traumatic. I don't think it is. I think it should be educational, but equally it's one that it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not. I would say it's for young adults and above. Let's put it like that.
Is there an age rating?
There's not. So I mean, if we wanted to get it age rated, we'd have to go to I think I'm right in saying the BFI. But I chatted to Oliver Bailey-Davies and the guys at the Performing Arts Centre, and we kind of came to the conclusion that when marketing it and going out, it's probably best to say it's probably a 13A, something around that territory.
Yeah, so young adults, teenagers and above.
Yeah.
And you've got, you mentioned Oliver Bailey-Davies there. So
yes.
He's very involved at the Performing Arts Centre.
Yeah.
But you've got some other, as you said, local names. So Cameron Ashplant, who's your brother.
Yes.
And Dave Hyatt, who's very well known, isn't he, in for many things locally, but he does a lot of acting, as you said, with Gaddock, but also in local films.
Yeah.
And you've also got some well-known names, or possibly not well-known names, but well-respected names within the industry.
Yes, yeah.
That aren't local names.
Certainly.
So you've got quite a breadth of talent working with you on this project.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's an interesting one because two of the cast are certainly one of them is critically acclaimed. He's a Caesar Award nominee, Mark Durrett. And the other is, and he's probably less well known maybe to Guernsey and UK audiences in the sense that he's a French actor, so his filmography is extensive in the French sort of film and TV scene, and to the extent that he's been in several sort of French cult classics. So by Luc Besson, the French director. So La Femme Nikita, La Haine, The Big Blue, and Doberman, and various others.
How did you get him involved?
Again, to contextualise it, there's been obviously there's a burgeoning film scene here, and not only short films have been made, but now features. So I think contacts have been made, and so I think as long as you reach out to the right local people, they'll happily put you in touch with well-respected and well-regarded individuals off island, as we've mentioned. And so really, it was just a case of me sort of cold calling and picking up the phone and saying, I've written a script based in Guernsey. It's a short film, and we'd be very glad if in this case Mark would be keen to be involved, and Mark's agent was very keen to pass on the script to him. And he read it, and he was very keen to be involved. So kind of a bit of a luck, a bit of a whim, but it's kind of paid off. Well, hopefully
that must have been a great feeling for you then when you got that message back that he was keen to be involved. There's also the British actor Patterson Joseph, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so he played Johnson in Peep Show.
So it was all kind of coming together in your planning stages.
Yeah.
And so when did you start working on this, and when did you start getting all these talented people together, and when did the work start?
We shot the film, and then we brought on the talent in a sense, because the guys, so Patterson and Mark, they provided their voice roles, and without spoiling too much, they play. Their characters are online betting employees, so they work for the French betting firm in which the protagonist is indebted to. So they answer the phone effectively. So it was kind of, I reached out to them after we'd shot the film. It felt like right that we had a French actor involved, but again, because you can play an accent, it felt right to not necessarily be too tethered to that idea. Unfortunately, Patterson has actually lived and worked in France, and he speaks fluent French. So I think we went to them, and I was very lucky that they sort of read the script, felt like it was an important cause that they wanted to be involved in, and we went from there, really.
So who else has been involved? So there's a couple of other names here. So producers and composers. Yeah. Again, more talent, but this is talent behind the scenes in the production.
Producer is Jonathan Tamuz, who he's Vancouver-based, Academy Award nominee, and he's best known for directing a short film called The Child Eater, which was nominated for an Oscar for Best Short Film at the 62nd Academy Awards. So again, he's got huge background and an understanding of what the genre requires to get it to the Oscars. So if it's good enough for them, it's certainly good enough for the local burgeoning Guernsey film scene. And I think Jonathan's, he's of that generation who was making films in the 80s and the 90s. So he made a comedy road drama called Rupert's Land, a feature film, It's a Canadian Screen Award-nominated film. A lot of his filmmaking has been of that genre, which is what we were going for. So he kind of came in with, an understanding of the lens, not only of the quality, but the lens of an understanding of the genre. To take the film to the place we wanted it to be. So, he came on board kind of in a quality control, monitoring and guidance position from Vancouver. So he saw the last kind of 6-7 drafts of the film rather than being involved kind of from the pre-production stages. But I think it was important for me as a budding filmmaker to have my ego sort of knocked down, because I think it's really easy to make something and feel really good about yourself and it's all great. But it's only when friends and family and others feed in and they say, that's not quite right, I don't agree with that, I don't think that's quite good. And one thing that he kind of came on and said was actually the pacing's all wrong. Difficult to hear, but it's important, right? So we kind of went back to the drawing board on the edit, and Ken Worthington, who's the editor, he's locally based, did an excellent job, and he kind of gritted his teeth and took the pacing to the places we needed it to be. But again, without that quality control from the likes of Jonathan and others, it wouldn't have, I don't think or hope, the film would have been as good as it's turned out to be.
Yeah, how did that feel then when he said to you, look, the pacing's wrong, start again? How did that feel?
I mean, it's difficult because you sort of vested a lot of time and time into it. So I think it's difficult to hear that, but it's important. And he was brought in that capacity and very kindly lended his time to watch the draft. So I could only take his advice on. It'd be crazy not to, really.
And in terms of a learning curve, that must be a very good one to be on, because, as you said, with his talent and his background,
definitely,
that's something that you'll bear in mind then, pacing in the editing process going forward.
I mean, I didn't go to film school, and I'd never made. I'd made a short documentary here about 4 or 5 years ago, but again, it was just me and a friend who picked up a camera and we made a documentary, and it wasn't too thought out. But with this, it was like, I'd heard of the term pacing. As a buzzword that filmmakers might throw around, but I never fully appreciated its importance when we got to the edit, and it was like, okay. And now it's like you watch the first version against the second, it's like you understand the difference.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I hope to make another film again, but if we do, inevitably I'll edit it, or the editor will edit it, and probably the pacing will be wrong first time again. So it's something it's kind of like an ever-evolving process.
But presumably that's quite common. And in terms of that process then, so you mentioned Ken Worthington, but there'll be different people that get involved at different stages, I'm guessing, in the production process? I
should mention a few of the guys involved, both on island and off island. So we've got a mix of crews. So I'll just fire out some names because it's worth giving the guys a shout out. So London-based Jay McCurgy, who was our sound designer. We've also got Los Angeles-based Juan Matos, who was the pianist for our LA-based composer Omar El Deeb. And then we've got a lot of local crews, so Matthew Stockwriter, who was the director of photography, who's filmed a lot of local films. He works very closely with Alex Bates and White Rock Productions, and he also filmed the local feature Marooned Awakening last year. Yep. And also, as I mentioned, Ken Worthington, our editor. But we've also got Anthony Ford Marsland, who's a gaffer, who's again worked on loads of local films. Barney Lawson as our boom operator, Nick Biddlecombe, our colourist. Gaz Papworth from Element Films, who did a bit of sound recording support. So we've got a wide-ranging team, and it's just worth just giving them some praise, because it's very much a collaborative art, and I can't sort of take the credit for it.
But hopefully as many of those people as possible, particularly the ones who are locally based, will be at the premiere on Friday night, so Friday the 15th at the Performing Arts Centre. Who else is going to be there? Is it invited guests only?
Some deputies will be joining us as well. And obviously members of the public once they've bought their tickets. So we've, in terms of the running order, we've got Deputy Steve Fuller has very kindly agreed to say some words on behalf of economic development and the states. And we've also I should also say, we've got Russ Fossey, who's chair of Guernsey Arts. And I haven't mentioned Guernsey Arts, but they've been absolutely vital and instrumental in terms of us getting this over the line, because we wouldn't have made the film as it stands without them, because they provided the budget. Hugely important organisation, and they should be supported till the end. I mean, I haven't got a crystal ball to sort of gaze into the future, but I think if we play our cards right, it feels like Guernsey could position itself in such a way that we are attractive, maybe is the right word, to filmmakers.
Yeah.
I think one point that's come up in these kind of discussions has also been the idea that Guernsey's a very versatile filmmaking location, in the sense of like, we're only 25 square miles, but within that, and it's very easy to move around the island within 25, 30 minutes max. We have got hugely different sort of terrain and landscape. So we've got Grand Rock, the rocky outcrops, we've got the pine trees at Reservoir and so on. And so it's like a hugely versatile landscape within such a small area. I think it's actually a perfect filmmaking location. I'm not saying that government should be involved in, and they certainly shouldn't, my personal opinion, they absolutely shouldn't be using taxpayer money in propelling that forward, because it's not only is it hugely risky, but it's also not best use of taxpayer money. But that's not to say that the government shouldn't necessarily commit small resource into exploring that potential and expanding, because if it's an economic growth factor, why not explore it to some extent? Whether it requires if it requires huge taxpayer funding, then I'm of course against that.
But obviously Guernsey Arts then do help with funding, not just in the film sector, but in all kind of creative sectors, don't they? And they support so many different
huge vast.
things.
Everything from paintings and pieces of artwork to film and everywhere in between, really. Performing arts, stage theatre, music. They're very active in promoting the local music scene, and they're hugely important, and I think not held in such high regard as they should be, because they are absolutely vital to having. Truth be told, we probably wouldn't have the burgeoning film scene that we do had they not existed. Certainly a lot of the films that have been made, not all, but certainly I think most probably have been made with their funding. So they're absolutely crucial.
So the Performing Arts Centre this Friday night, and after then, when will people be able to watch it? Will it be available online? Are you going to be submitting it to any film festivals or awards?
So it remains to be seen. I think because it's a short film, it's not necessarily commercially viable. So earlier this year, my brother's feature, Marooned Awakening, picked up a US distribution deal.
Brilliant.
And I think there's the difference there is because it's a feature, it's commercially viable, so it can be placed on a platform like Amazon or Netflix. Whereas with this, it's not so commercially viable because it's only 17 minutes. So it's purely kind of more of a creative expression without being too snobby. But the long-term plan is to go to film festivals with it. And we're in the process now. We're at that juncture now where we're kind of going out to submit. It's just about, I guess it depends. It remains to be seen how it pans out from there. Really.
And what next then? What else are you working on?
So I'm very fortunate to be appearing in front of the camera in Alex Bates's next short film, Sands of Purgatory. So he has very kindly brought me into the cast, and I'm very appreciative of that, and that's going to be a great film because I think he's touted it as being his most ambitious yet, so that's quite exciting.
And that's all been filmed locally, hasn't it?
Again, he's filming that locally, and again, that's I think I'm right in saying it's post-apocalyptic, so again, just proves how versatile Guernsey can be. I'm also involved in a little bit of theatre locally, so I'm in Romeo and Juliet at the end of the year. With More Theatre. It's the theatre company of Andrew Hislop, who's very big in the local theatre scene and now burgeoning film scene. So there's lots coming up, and it's exciting to see where things go.
Thank you for listening to The Interview, a Bailiwick Express podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. You can find us on all social media channels, and if you'd like to keep up to date on all the work the Express team does, please sign up to our daily email by visiting gsy.bailiwickexpress.com.